I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Dobbin to the You and Your Business studio. Hi, Andrew.
How are you, Alec? Thank you for having me on today.
I'm delighted to have you on, Andrew. Gosh, there's plenty I know we talk about, but you and I know each other for some time. So I'm really looking forward to this. But unfortunately, the pain part starts with, I take you back to your last year at school. Were you the sort of academic? Were you the person who wanted to travel? Or what was on your mind when you were thinking of leaving school?
Well, my last years in school, I was glad, to be honest with you, to leave. I had no expectation for university, none of that at all. I actually just wanted to get a job and to get started in the real world, as such as I called it. So I left after I did an extra year because of my O levels, or GCSEs as they're called now.
Sure.
And I had a car accident the year before, but that led me in just do an extra year. But once I got that, I wanted to get out into the real world. So yeah.
Okay, so you have to get out in the real world. Where does the real world start for you?
Well, to be honest with you, I had been working from I was, in my school years, always a part-time job, and I worked in a local filling station where we sold car parts as well. We sold coal, we fixed tires, all those different things.
Yeah.
And during that summer, there was an advert in the paper for a tire fitter, a trainee tire fitter, and I applied for a job as a trainee tire fitter.
Wow. Okay, then that's something completely different. So how did you embrace all of that?
Well, I actually went for the interview, and the only thing the boss really wanted to know was, can you work computers? And at that time, computers was only coming into the tire industry at that time, and everything was done with stock cards. And it was because I had an O level in computers that he wanted to know. And in real terms, it was nothing like what it was going to be like, but that's where I was. And so I think that's why I got the job, because I had an O level in computers, nothing to do with my skills.
Well, it's a great way to start. It's amazing, just by saying yes, you end up somewhere. So tell me, how did you find that?
Well, I think the first time, and I suppose the challenge at the very start for me was, I was only in the job a short time, and said, "Oh, you have to go back to college because this is a trainee post." And I said to him, "Well, if I'm going back to college, I'm leaving, because I don't want to go back to school at all." And after a while, they said, "No, that's okay." So I ended up staying on. But it was a great learning. You think about it, you had office, you learned around the office, you learn how to fit tires, you learn how to fit exhaust, give you all the training, customer service. You get your first introduction to dealing with customers.
Sure.
Selling, all those simple things, but so important.
And tell me this, had they any sort of real, what we call today, onboarding sort of program, or were you just thrown in at the deep end and had to kind of work it out yourself?
I wouldn't say there was much onboarding as people talk about today, but it was a small group of people. The branch I worked in, there was 4 or 5 of us just, and you just learn on the job, but just back to normal stuff and just getting on with it, my sense. But no, not much onboarding, but still a very profitable place to work in.
Yeah, it's great. And again, you just sort of build up camaraderie with people, and people share skills, which is something we don't see a lot happening these days in a larger organization.
Well, you get to a point, you get on with each other, but you also were learning from each other. Some people were more experienced, more mechanical minded. And I also had that desire to learn. And one of the things when the computerization was coming in, they always did the training for that in the evenings, which was done in a hotel, maybe in Belfast. So we were always having to travel. But sure. I ended up being the driver because someone would maybe take a little drink on the way home. So I get the chance of driving and all the rest. So I took those opportunities. I always was trying to. So I was being invited along to those events because of that. That was the feature.
Fantastic. And you spent quite some time there initially.
I was with that initial. With them for 8.5 years.
Wow. Wow.
And during that time, I suppose sometimes you get unsettled, but I was continually learning in the process. And I suppose sometimes you get to a point, sometimes like, I could do more, I could achieve more, I could be better. And you're maybe always looking, grass is always greener on the other side, they say, but I definitely was learning that time, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously you were content doing what you were doing. Obviously you had ambitions for other things. So how are those ambitions going to sort of manifest themselves?
Well, one of the times, another branch, which was quite a bit of distance away, 70 odd miles away, they had no manager. The company, ATS Northern Ireland, was taken over by ATS Cymru Wales. Right. There were a lot of changes going on. There was 14, I think it was, regional companies in the UK at that time. And then they brought that in a bit to only maybe, I think it was 11 or 12. So they brought together Northern Ireland Cymru Wales. And that was a big change. So there was a lot of change in staff at that time. And the manager of ATS OMA was made redundant or paid off, whatever happened. And they asked me would I cover for a short time. And that's what I did. I traveled every day to cover there.
And that's interesting because sort of managing is a totally different skill to working on the shop floor because of, hey, a couple of things. Number one is you've built up camaraderie with the people you're working with. So it means that you also have to bring a different discipline to it. How did you cope with that?
Well, for me, it was, I'm here, I'm in charge, I've got to look after it. This is the way we're going to do things. We've got to look after customers. If you like it and you get on with it, great. If you want to try and rebel against it, we're going to have a problem. And sometimes people did try and push the envelope and say a wee bit, and you just have to deal with that. Simple as that.
I mean, some people expect a certain amount of flexibility to suit themselves. And I know you probably would have come across that.
Flexibility, I have no problem with flexibility as long as people want to be flexible. But the problem is sometimes people's flexibility sometimes is all about them as opposed to other people. And I've had to, certain times you had to bring people in and say, look, if you want to be flexible, this is what flexibility means. If you want to have very much a staid sense of doing work, this is what it also means. So you pick. And normally you find that people come back to the flexibility again.
They get steered in the right direction.
Steered in the right direction, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
Obviously, sort of taking on this sort of manager role was going to open up opportunities for the future. Maybe tell me a bit more about that.
In looking after them and getting used to that, I then the job opportunity come up for that particular depot, and they said to me, "Look, would you want to go for it?" And it was as simple as that. I said, "Okay, I'll apply." And see, it was. Now, the interesting thing also for that time was my girlfriend at that time was living in Belfast, but her parents were from Omagh.
Ah.
So I thought, well, if I get the job on probation, as you would, I can stay with them for that 3 months to see whether I get keeping the job or something. So that's why I applied, and I was successful and got it at that time. So it was good.
So you had your feet under the table in more than one sense.
Feet under the table. So whenever people say they moved, sometimes people say, "Oh, I moved to another area to get my wife or whatever, or get my husband." For me, I was bringing my wife home to her home place, really. So. Yeah.
I love that. There we go. Well done. So, okay, you were a manager there. How many years were you doing that sort of role?
I was in the first step I was in for 8.5 years. Then I was the manager for about 3.5 years. And a lot of change was going on, a lot of development, training, managerial training, all those things, which you learn as you go. We also brought in, I think it was BS 5750 at that time, which I don't know what it is today, but it was all about quality and all that type of thing. And it was all great experience. So 3.5 years or so before I moved on to becoming the area manager, actually.
All right. How did that come about?
Area manager role, it would come up. The man who was area manager, he was retiring. He was an older man. And I was advised to apply for it by one of the sales managers. And he said, "Look, I think you should apply for this." And I said, "Are you sure?" Because I didn't actually feel I was qualified for that. But I finally did apply for it and I was successful. So
it's amazing. I mean, what you have in common with a lot of entrepreneurs is this sort of ability, sometimes maybe to not state your case strongly enough, but suddenly when you find the position, realize, gosh, I'm more than capable of handling this.
I think sometimes you don't actually know until you're in the roles, and that's the thing. So one of the things I learned in the whole process, even whenever I looked at other people who were applying, I thought they were possibly better qualified, but it wasn't about learning to fit a tire, and it wasn't about fitting an exhaust. There was a lot more to it. It was managing of people. It was the right attitude. It's the type of people who could go to any customer and talk to them. Those are all things that other people could see, especially in a sense, and I don't mean it the wrong way, but whenever you're looking down from those positions to other people below, you can see the qualities they have. Sometimes when you're on the level of people, you don't see those things. You think people are looking for other things. So
it's interesting. A lot of successful organizations have this whole way of operating in terms of that people who get promoted start from the ground floor up, and so therefore have a wide knowledge of what we do in every aspect, which I think makes them much more rounded people.
Yeah, and also the other thing, especially for myself and my boss, who was the head of ATS Cymru Wales, the managing director, he had been in ATS for a long time, and he had the heart and soul of the business in him. That was him, the person. And I think in many ways I was exactly the same. I enjoyed the company. I want to be part of the company. I want to see the company progress. And that's coming from the very beginning. So from a trainee tire fitter, you might call it, right up into managerial level.
I mean, I know loyalty is very important to you. So, how did that work for you throughout the organization? And what was it part of the decision then when you decided to ultimately leave?
Well, I was there for, I became the area manager, and then I was in that for a time, and then the company changed again, and actually I got the job as a territory manager, which managed Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's my opportunity I had. But my boss and I became very, very close, and he was very much a mentor to me in many ways. And, he was the type of person I spoke to every single day. Even on Saturday, we would have spoken on Saturday. We went through the figures for every depot. We talked about it. We looked at the problems that was going on. He would advise on things. But he was also the person, whenever you sat in a meeting and you said, this is something I want to do, he might have said, well, I don't think that'll work or whatever. But if you think you can make it work, give it a go.
Oh.
And even if it didn't work, the next month he came back, it didn't work. Okay, that's fine. At least we know now. Let's move on. So he always gave you room to grow and to develop. That was a big thing.
That's an interesting part, because of mentoring we will come back to, but mentoring I think is a very important aspect for every business owner.
Yeah, I think it's getting people alongside you, but that was mentoring within the business. So he was, in many ways, he wasn't really mentoring me how to do the job, but he was mentoring me in a higher level of things, just not just about managing people, but having a greater view of the whole company and different things that was happening. So that loyalty, I had a great loyalty to him as a person. And I know the other people who, at the level I was, also had that loyalty to him, because he was also loyal to us as such. And that was a big thing, yeah.
However, there were changes about to happen. Tell us more about those.
Company was going through a lot of changes. As I said earlier, there was like 12 regional type companies, and then it was all taken over and it was being developed into one company. So they were doing away with all the regional companies. So all the credit control would move to Birmingham, all the sales and marketing would Birmingham, all the HR would move to everything was being moved there. And there was this idea of a big call centers, and everything was in 2 or 3 locations around Birmingham at that point. So everything was being centralized. And my MD, he became the operations director for the UK for the heavy vehicle side, so looking at the truck side of business. And I became the territory manager for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in that time, there's a lot of change. There were a lot of people were got rid of, calls of people, staff, remove a lot. There was a lot of bad blood happening. And I remember getting very unsettled. So I was with the company for 17 and a half years at that stage. And I just wasn't happy. But I remember speaking to my boss. We went out for a meal and I said, I'm not happy. I'm thinking of leaving. I've had an opportunity. I've another to go to. And he said to me, look, I want you to hang on. Things will change. Things will change. And just about that time, he actually got made redundant from the whole firm as well. And it was a shock to him. It was a shock to me and a shock to other people around him. And that was the one time. And then a short time later, then my role, they told me he was made redundant, and they offered me a job back in Northern Ireland. And to be fair to the company, it was a well enough paid job. There was no issue, but it was just the way everything had worked out. And I was still unhappy with that. And the job offer I had 6 months ago was still open. And I went back and I took the job then.
I think it's very interesting when you look at organizations who sort of put in massive amounts of change, and particularly things like what you might call decentralization and taking functions away from the individual branches. We can certainly see from a financial point of view where it might make sense, but often it's not thought out thoroughly.
I think the danger was, and even simple things, it used to be more localized people dealing in credit control, for instance. So you had better understanding, you work with a sales rep, all those things. Once I was moved to Birmingham at that time, there was less personality, less relationships. It was more a matter of fact, all that type of stuff. And that actually annoyed a lot of people, I think, and that was a real danger. And they may have needed to do that, but it didn't go down well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quite interesting. Certainly something around credit control, where you may be dealing with a rural community and maybe dealing with different sorts of people. You need to be flexible enough to understand their circumstances, because as you'd know them well enough. We will get paid, but they mightn't just be paying today. So they're good customers, though.
Yeah, and things like that, especially big haulage companies, somebody was putting stop, you couldn't, they had a lorry broken down somewhere. and you couldn't service them. That was just a no-no. And then you just lost a bit. Once that happens, you have no chance of getting it back. Or very little chance of getting that business back.
So the flexibility and also sort of loyalty to the customer.
Yeah, a lot of those things. Yeah,
it gets left behind.
The paper over the cracks for so long, but then it just fell apart in that sense. Yeah.
All right, you were to move on to Pastures New. What were they?
Well, the interesting thing for me was the actual job offer I had was from a customer, actually.
All right.
So he had and one of the other customers I dealt with was a large company in Northern Ireland, and they were also buying over the vehicle side of that. This was a contract hire vehicle and a fleet management company. So I went to work for them. They had about 3 companies within them. They wanted to bring them all in together more. So my role initially was to try and help them operation-wise while they were going through some change. And I worked with them for about 18 months, and I enjoyed that. There was a lot of helping, supporting systems, all that type of thing. And I worked with them. They ended up, that company developed even further and went on to be a company in the stock market and all the rest of it. But I got out to that stage, and I went to work for a promotional clothing company.
As you do, it's a natural sort of transition.
Well, for me, I think something business is still business. It's about a product, and it's about selling, it's managing people and all the rest of it. And I worked for this promotional clothing company, and that was part of what we were doing, trying to help them, support them with things like, one major salesperson in the company, and he had all the relationships with all the big customers.
Right.
And dangers within that, or the operational side, scrap was too high. So I come in really look after the operations and keep an eye on the sales as well. So it was a good experience. Definitely good experience.
They also had an interesting channel to market, which you took a real sort of draw towards.
Well, I suppose we tried different things, but one of the things I was introduced to, somebody invited me to go along, was to BNI, or Business Network International. And I went along to it. The first one I went to actually was in Belfast, but it just didn't work. It was too far away from me in some ways, just where I was living. And then I realized there was one local to the business in Lisburn. And I went along, and I seen some of our customers were already in this. And I thought, well, this is a place for introductions, place for referrals. And that's why I joined. And I joined it really, the main thing was because it was a localized business group. And that was all. And it wasn't just to focus on the business, but it was focus on, well, these are local business people, we should be with them.
Yeah, it must have been interesting because not everybody's very comfortable networking. So how did you embrace that?
Well, I'm not a great, I struggle actually with networking in many ways. Probably in a room full of people I don't know, I still have to push myself. But this is slightly different. BNI very much around referral driven. And you get to know people, and you start to build relationships with people. You start to have coffees with people. You start to have lunches with people. So it was more than just going to a networking event where you're thrown in and expecting to try and find business. It was about longer term. It was more around the farming of relationships as opposed to the hunting side. And I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the training that they gave you. And they got you to think of who your market was, how to present yourself better. So there's a massive learning. And I think a lot of small business could learn from organizations like that. They can learn how to present themselves, they learn how to focus on certain elements. Because one of the dangers we have is we are doers. The electrician is a great electrician, but he's not great at promoting his business. Or, so we're all the same. This gives you an opportunity to learn how to promote your business, how to market your business.
Well, as I talk about, the business has 2 sides. One is the skill set you've got, and the other one is the business of running a business. So I think that yours fits nicely into that second one, which people are very weak at.
Yeah, and also it introduces you other people who help and support you, who advise you. They've come with, so like I come from a massive experience of working within a multinational company. Then also worked within, say, that promotional clothing company, which is a family business. So I had a lot of experience, but just as much as I had experience, there was other people there who had massive jobs, multinational companies as well. So you could learn from them. And again, it just introduces you to a network of people that you can, that you trust and you can work with. Big thing. They can introduce you to a lot of things or help and support you.
I know certainly that you like the BNI so much that it was become part of your future then from there.
Well, I was in that company for 8 years. And really the company went through a lot of changes after the sort of financial meltdown at one point, and we were restructuring it. We developed into the more online stuff for schools. my boss had taken sort of a backward seat, but then he wanted to come more forward, get more involved in that. And the more he got involved, both of it, you can't have two heads in a business because only one's going to win at that. And the owner, so we parted in good company, no problem. So I got a bit of a package. I left and out and started my own. But while I was in that BNI scenario as a member of the clothing company or promotional clothing, I had also got involved in supporting other members out of other places. And one of the girls in there had said to me, Andrew, I think you should do some mentoring, which I'd started on my own and making some cash. So whenever I left that company, I then started to do mentoring. So I'd started to do some mentoring in a mastermind group. And then I was in that for I joined BNI again as a member because that's people who I knew. And I thought, where do I go to get business? I might as well go back to people who I know and build that network even further. So with that then, BNI approached me to look after the region from an operational point of view. And I started to look after it then for 5 years or so. But in the process, I'd also had an option to buy. So I then, in January this year, I've just purchased the franchise area as well. So yeah, it's been a journey in that way.
It certainly has. And I mean, what would you say to people? Because you've gone through some extreme changes from, the secure job with the guaranteed monthly salary to really stepping out on your own with nothing, well, small amount guaranteed, but you have to go out and actually do it for yourself now.
Sometimes people say, you have to have this great massive plan. And I really haven't been like that in some ways. I take one day at a time and I look at the opportunities that I have. And even whenever you're working for yourself, you have to look for those opportunities to develop them even further. But I do think, sometimes people get so unhappy in a job situation potentially, and it's actually killing them in that way. And if you have, and sometimes people have got so much potential. But one thing I would say, even you've got the potential, and even you've got, find yourself a good network to be part of a good network of people who will support you and with you along that way. And maybe in some ways even mentor you, but get someone alongside you as well, a mentor, a coach, someone who can find your blind spot sometimes. And sometimes people who can bring you into a thinking. So even one of the things we run is a mastermind group. So even whenever people bring those into a mastermind group, whether it's a paid one or non-paid, it doesn't matter. But if you get into that setting, people will be honest with you. And you need somebody to bounce ideas off. And that shouldn't just be your wife or your best friend. Find other business people. Surround yourself with the right people. That's the big thing.
I mean, this is the world you're in today. So there's two parts of that I'd just like to focus on for about the 3.5 minutes we've left. Number one, about networking. I mean, people have so many different perspectives about networking, but as somebody who's as experienced as you and working with an organization that's international, maybe you'd like to share some of the key pieces around networking.
Well, me, firstly, find a network that's a strong referral network. Find one which meets weekly, if possible. One that's there for business generation. Get part of another network, which might be a chamber network or something a bit looser, other business people in there. And then also be part of another network, whether it be a community type network as well, because all those parts are there to support and to generate business. So that's one thing I would say. Don't just get yourself into one network, be part of other ones. And also go in networking. Don't be going to network to sell, go to network to support and help other people. BNI uses the whole thing about givers gain. Become a giver and support other people. But also, when you get the opportunity, ask for help or ask for business if you get that opportunity. But don't go with that selling approach all the time. That's a big thing around networking, I think.
I think too many people expect that you sort of turn up at an event and kind of pass out your cards like confetti at a wedding, and then expect just to sit back to take the orders in.
It has to be about the relationship, and you just can't sell. There's some people will buy something on the day. That's fine. There's some people like that. Or there might be a product that people might want on the day, and that's okay. But it's about how do you help other people, and it's long term. Always have to think of long term. Some people's very short term motivated, and I think that doesn't go down well at networking events. There's a
talk to me. Yeah, in the sort of minute and a half we've left, could you just tell me a bit about the mentoring side and how important it is? You've talked about it in your life journey, but now you're on that side giving it. So talk about the value of that.
Well, the mentoring side, I'll give you a couple of examples. One last week, I spoke to this person a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about how he was following up with customers and how customers were putting them off. One simple thing we talked about was introducing that conversation about the cost of delay, the customers potentially delaying, starting to talk about the cost of delay. 2 weeks later, he tells me that actually worked for him. He ended up getting another £600 out of the sale. You know, it's maybe a small amount, but that's something he's now learned in dealing with that. Another client last week, he was talking about the leaflets he's distributing, but he had never thought about actually how he was going to measure the leaflet distribution and the results from it, and even capturing the details. Two simple things, but massive impact on their business just by asking some questions.
I mean, I think it's what you're saying really is sometimes you need an outside perspective to help you focus because you're too close to the coalface.
Well, if you and I sitting across the table and I write down a 6 on a piece of paper, it's a 6 to me, but it's a 9 to you. And the thing is, we always need to see it in a different way. And it doesn't matter what it is in business, people will have a different view. Doesn't mean say they're right, but it may not be right for you, but it gives a different view. And at least then it gives you a better chance to make a decision what you're going to do with it. That's a big thing.
Well, and you've one more sentence to finish up on what you'd like to advise people on to do. Where can they find more about you and how to connect?
You can find me on my website, which is thebusinessmindset.co.uk. One simple thing I always have, I have in my reminders every single day, and I have a reminder, and just as the word ask for help. Now, you know, we always live in this world where we want to be giving, but always be willing to ask for help.